everyone, and welcome to Debating Metal. I'm your host, Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, along with my co-host, Chris Kaye. You always hear about the big four of thrash metal, and lots of fans and critics try to come up with their own version of the big four of thrash. But what I seldom hear are big fours in other subgenres, specifically glam metal.
From New York City to the Sunset Strip in LA, glam metal rose to prominence in the early 80s and rode the wave of popularity until the rise of grunge in the 1990s. On this episode, Kenneth and I will give you our versions of the big four of glam metal, and at the end, we'll give you our big four glam metal vocalists.
So put on your mascara and lipstick, sit back, relax, pout your lips, crank this sucker to 11, and let the debate begin. All right. The big four of glam metal, or what we think, you and I think, are the big four of glam metal. And I'm pretty sure our lists are not going to be the same. So we're going to throw this out there and see what we come up with.
You and I have different ideas of that genre, I think, and so I'm interested to see where your opinions lie versus mine.
Now, I mean, anybody who's been listening to this show for the past 3 years will know that I'm relatively mainstream when it comes to a lot of things. And there's a few things here and there that I've gone off of the mainstream to like, specifically like a band like Saigon Kick. And I say that they're not mainstream only because they weren't around for very long. They weren't super popular, but they did have a hit. They did have a gold single with Love Is On The Way. But for the most part, they were regional, so you'll catch a person here and there who might know about them, but not a lot. They're not huge. So that to me is what I would say is not mainstream. But then, mainstream in terms of glam metal, we're talking about all the big guys. And that's what we're going to talk about now. We're going to narrow it down to four of the biggest that we think, maybe in my opinion, I would say influential, popular, biggest sellers, who knows, all that combined. You might have a different idea.
I probably will.
All right. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to both basically talk about, we're going to announce our list of each big four that we have. And then if we have anybody similar, if we have any in common, then we'll talk about, what we found to like about that band or those bands. Whatever we don't have in common, then we're going to basically defend our choice and go from there. So throw out your big four glam metal bands.
All right. So my big four, I guess let's just get it out of the way. Mine are Motley Crue, Poison, Quiet Riot, and Bon Jovi.
Wow. What I think are the big four of glam metal, I have some similarities to you. We actually have a 50-50 split.
Okay.
I've got Motley Crue, Dokken, Rat, and Bon Jovi. So we have both Motley Crue in common and both Bon Jovi in common. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about Motley Crue and Bon Jovi first, each separately, obviously, and kind of give a reason why we chose them for our big four glam metal bands. All right, so before we talk about Motley Crue and the rest of the bands, let's go ahead and basically let everyone know if for some reason someone out there is listening who doesn't know the individual people in the band and their albums that make up their career. Let me list it real quick here. Motley Crue consists of Vince Neil on vocals, Nikki Sixx on bass, Tommy Lee on drums, and Mick Mars on guitar. Now, Mick Mars obviously left just a few years ago, or was it this year? This year, right? He quit?
He, quote unquote, quit.
Right. Pushed out.
Yeah.
Was given the concrete shoes. All right. Now, Motley Crue formed in 1981. And they had 5 albums that came out in the 1980s, all considered classic albums. The first one was Too Fast for Love, which went platinum. Shout at the Devil, which went quadruple platinum. Theater of Pain, that went quadruple platinum. Girls, 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 that went quadruple platinum. And Dr. Feelgood, that went 6 times platinum. Motley Crue retired in 2015, and then they reformed in 2018 to record some new music for their movie The Dirt that was coming out, and then they actually reunited for a full-blown tour in 2020 that ended up getting canceled due to the pandemic. But as we all know, they did it again in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. Excuse me, 2022. Sorry. And then they're back at it again. They did some more dates this year, and they're doing Europe next year.
Yeah, I mean, the shell of Motley Crue is still touring.
The shell of Motley, basically. The skeleton. All right, so what is it? What is it that? Why'd you choose Motley Crue?
For me, when I think of glam, that attitude, the look, everything like that, I really think of Motley Crue. That they're the band that kind of first and foremost comes to mind. Those first few albums, like Too Fast for Love, is a little bit heavier, but it still has that glam, appearance to it. But albums like Shout at the Devil, Theater of Pain, Girls, 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 those to me are like glam. Sure, by the time you get into the 90s, especially, with the Motley Crue album and, then getting into Generation Swine, etc., sure, like they really kind of backed off of the whole glam thing. But like even to this day, you look at Nikki Sixx and, he's just an older glam guy, the music is just about decadence. It's about, hooking up with girls and things like that. So, I mean, there's not ever really been more depth to Motley Crue than just that. And it really fits the whole glam scene. They're one of the bands that truly defines it for me.
And I would agree with you on that regards, because I mean, when you think about, for me, when I think about glam, I think about the sleazy side of it, I guess you could say, or the sleazy look of it, and Motley Crue totally fit that vibe. They had that sleazy look to them. There's a few other bands that had that look to them in the 80s. Most of them came out of the LA Sunset Strip scene.
Yeah.
But
they still got the sleaze down,
Well, but yeah, but they're older now.
So older and just as sleazy as ever.
Exactly. But the thing is, when I started doing this and started doing the research, very minimal, because I obviously lived through this. It surprised me how many records they sold on those classic albums. I mean, Too Fast for Love really should be more like a double platinum album, and maybe they just haven't gone back to recertify it for whatever. But Shout, Theater, and Girls all quadruple platinum, 4 times platinum. And then Dr. Feelgood, I knew was their biggest seller because it was just a huge album at the time. I'm just really surprised at those numbers, quite honestly. And you and I were kind of touching upon not necessarily the specific bands, but we kind of were talking about Vince Neil and Motley Crue earlier today. And the one thing that really surprises me about them is that when you listen to the albums, like for instance, Theater Pain, there's really, for the most part, 2 or 3 solid songs on that I would say are really good songs. Girls,
Yeah.
Girls, Girls to me has 2 songs, and the rest of the album is relatively questionable. Because like Wild Side and Girls, Girls, Girls are so far and above, way above, better than the rest of the album. And then, we discussed Dr. Feelgood on a head-to-head way early in the career of debating metal. And there was part of that album where he's like, this is trash. This song stinks. And we actually chose, I think both you and I both chose Shout at the Devil as a better album than Dr. Feelgood. So, and then for that to be 6 million seller, yeah, it had some good singles. Don't Go Away Mad, Dr. Feelgood, Kicks Out My Heart. But what was good was great. What was bad was bad. And that's Motley Crue in a nutshell. It's just like it's one or the other. And we're discussing them in the sense of the big four, and so I don't really. By this point, at the end of the '80s, by the time that glam metal began to die, to me, their influence was already set. So we're not going to talk about the '90s and what they're doing today, other than the fact that Mick Mars is no longer in the band. But yeah, I mean, I see why, because they were one of the first ones, and they were the ones that were, for lack of a better term, most popular, biggest sellers, maybe, sleaziest, maybe. They did some crazy shit, and they're still here to talk about it, which is amazing.
Not everybody related to them is around to talk about it, but yeah. Yeah, but I mean that's just part of the scene. Again, like I've said before, glam metal was all about decadence, and that band lived it up, and they still do.
Yes, they still do. They are definitely one of the big four glam metal bands out there. All right, so you also had in common with me Bon Jovi.
Yes, I did.
So Bon Jovi consists of John Bon Jovi on vocals, Richie Sambora on guitars, David Bryan on keyboards, Tico Torres on drums, and Alec John Such on bass. That's the original five guys. They formed in 1983. They had 4 classic albums that came out in the 1980s, and that was Bon Jovi, which went platinum, 7,800 Degrees Fahrenheit, which went platinum, and Slippery When Wet went diamond. It actually sold 12 million copies, and New Jersey sold 7 million copies. Now, an album that they released, I believe it was in 1990 or 91, was Keep the Faith. But that was the point at which Bon Jovi started to make a not so sharp left turn, but they were starting to make that left turn. So we're not going to discuss that because that's really not important for what we're discussing. And one last note, Alec John Such quit / was fired in 1994, and he actually passed away last year at the age of 70. So you picked Bon Jovi. What is it? Why did you pick Bon Jovi?
I mean, Bon Jovi had such mass appeal. Honestly, one of the biggest bands that we're talking about, if not the biggest band that we're talking about, because they did reach diamond status. Bon Jovi was one of those bands that, even if you weren't necessarily into the glam scene, the music was so good that it appealed to a much wider audience. For me, when I think of glam, sometimes I don't think of Bon Jovi initially because, the band has changed so much over the years. But when you really look at those early days, the first few years of glam, they've certainly exemplified the genre. And, it's the quality of the music. Like I said, they had such great singles during that time that, I mean, if you said Bon Jovi, I think just about anybody could name a song off. Wanted, Dead or Alive, Living on a Prayer, You Give Love a Bad Name, Runaway. It's just like those first 4 albums, they stayed within that glam genre. And then they're one of the bands also, like you said, we're not going to really talk about the change, but I think it's kind of important. Like, Bon Jovi has really remained relevant this entire time. And like other big fours that we are aware of, there are bands that managed to do that. Even beyond when they were popular for a certain genre of music, they can adapt, grow, change, and it doesn't feel like a sellout. Like, I don't think anybody ever thought Bon Jovi was a sellout, other than maybe selling out stadiums.
Well, I don't think Bon Jovi ever was considered a sellout. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that their appeal was mostly to, for what it's worth, mostly to women, right? but obviously guys dug the music. But at some point, as they made that slow left turn, they then eventually made a hard left turn, and they actually, they made like sort of like they redid their classic songs almost in an acoustic country style. So they went more like pop country towards the end, to some degree.
Yeah, maybe a little. Yeah, I mean,
they definitely
pop,
went away
hard rock, pop, soft rock.
right.
Yeah.
So I mean, hey, kudos to them for being able to remain relevant, and that's great. Motley, look, for what it's worth, Motley Crue, obviously having returned, well, not even returned, because they never left per se, but after when they retired in 2015 and they decided to come back because of their Dirt movie, the fact that they were gone for 5 years at that point, 3 years when they decided to start making new music for the movie, and in 5 years when they announced that they were coming back after retiring, to go and sit there and say, oh, we're going to go do a stadium tour, that took a lot of balls. But at the same time, they had help because they brought along with them Def Leppard. Okay. And then they brought along some really good underbands. Joan Jett was one of the artists that was with them. I forgot who the other ones were. So that it was a good bill.
Yeah.
Because
there's a lot of people that go see bands by accident. I kind of make that joke a lot. Like, I've seen Lamb of God many times by accident, and
exactly.
and it's because I go to see whoever the headliner is, and I'm like, oh sweet, Lamb of God's there too, cool. And that's kind of the thing. Like, I think a lot of people probably were like, I want to go see Def Leppard. Oh, Motley Crue's there too.
Well, I don't think they would be able to have done a successful stadium tour without the help of Def Leppard, without a huge name like Def Leppard.
I agree. Yeah.
If they're going by themselves and they've got, Joan Jett and Cheap Trick opening for them, they're not selling stadiums. That's a shed show all day long. But, who am I? The fact that they actually did a stadium tour 2 years in a row, that was quite a feat. Now, how successful the second half, that second year or this year was, I can't say. But I agree with you with Bon Jovi. Bon Jovi's so I decided, you know what? Let me go ahead and listen to the first album for the first time ever.
Mm-hmm.
I've never listened to that album in a conscious way, ever. I know about Runaway. I know about the song She Don't Know Me. But as a whole, front to back, I don't think I've ever consciously listened to it and said, "Oh, Bon Jovi's first album." And I tell you this right now, Runaway, if it came out today, is a hit. And the reason why is that song still sounds fresh. It still sounds relevant. It does not sound dated whatsoever. The keyboards don't have that cheesy 80s sound to them. There's another song I think that comes right after that. Can't remember what the title is. That song has a cheesy keyboard to it. Then it wasn't Shot Through the Heart, but there was another song. And I'm pulling up the list right now. Just so we can go over it really, really quick. That song Roulette. That's the song. The second song on the album had a really like cheesy keyboard. The sound of it sounded almost demo-ish to some degree. It didn't sound anywhere good as good or as clean as Runaway. Right. So I'm listening to this and I'm like, this is why Bon Jovi, basically hit it right away. I mean, the song Runaway was great. She Don't Know Me was catchy. And then they built, it was just a platinum album, but it built. I mean, Runaway was huge. And then 7800 Degrees Fahrenheit, another album which I don't think I've listened to all the way through, but In and Out of Love was huge. And on MTV, that was big. And then I believe they had a hit single with Silent Night. So then comes 1986. That was a fucking huge year.
It's a great
1986.
year.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, some guy I know was born that year.
It's true, but also just it's a great year for music in general.
Yes. Slippery When Wet comes out, and that just puts Bon Jovi into the stratosphere, you know. And then they follow it up with New Jersey, which was just as big. I mean, not as big, but I mean, dude, selling 7 million copies of an album is pretty big. I mean, it's not easy to go diamond. And at the time, it wasn't diamond. You know, it hadn't sold 10 million in 1987, 1988. But give it 5-6 years, and yeah, it became a big seller. New Jersey was huge. And then even Keep the Faith was pretty big. A couple years later. So, I agree. I mean, they were big influence on that scene. They weren't as sleazy as Motley Crue, and that was something about it. Like, I'm pretty sure they kept their private lives as private as possible. And a lot of people had Bon Jovi as this goody two shoes kind of guy, and I'm pretty sure he wasn't. Okay, but at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, didn't he marry his like high school sweetheart type of woman? And he's been married for a really long time.
Yeah, I think he's been married to the same person for, basically since the 80s.
Right. So, he may not have been completely innocent, but at the same time, the guy has pretty much lived a straightforward life, and he's a workaholic when it comes to his music and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about his personal life, to be honest. But you have to understand, like, image a lot of times is reality. Like what we perceive people to be is what they are, and Bon Jovi didn't have this image as a playboy and going out there and getting drunk and on drugs and stuff like that, and so he has this image of being a more on the more innocent end of the music scene, right? So his image is pretty tame in comparison to definitely to Motley Crue.
Oh yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, all of them look like little choir boys next to Motley Crue.
Yeah, I mean, and the guys in Bon Jovi all relatively look healthy in comparison to, like,
Yeah,
the clean living gets you further along in life. So
yeah. So he got married to his wife Dorothea in 1989. So not long after
I was born.
True, but not long after he rose to international stardom. And I'm reading this, and this is amazing to me. But his cousin is Robert Hedges, and Robert Hedges is Juan Epstein from Welcome Back, Kotter. And I'm like, holy cow! It's unfortunate. Robert passed away in 2012, but holy crap, I had no idea. I mean, I would never have thought that that's his cousin. But hey,
I've never heard that before. That's interesting.
So
I used to watch that show when I was a kid.
So yeah, I used to love that show. Okay, so now you and I have two different 3 and 4, if you want to look at it that way. You chose Poison and Quiet Riot. I chose Dokken and Rat. Why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about Quiet Riot?
So I'm gonna basically just say the version of Quiet Riot that really was more related to the glam scene, and that was the one that came out with Metal Health. So that was Kevin DuBrow on lead vocals, Carlos Cavazo on guitars, Rudy Sarzo on bass guitar, and Frankie Banali on drums. So the reason I say we're going to talk about that version is because there was a version of Quiet Riot that was before that. In 1978, it was a band featuring Kevin DuBrow and Randy Rhoads. Randy Rhoads on lead guitar, and Kelly Garney on bass guitar, and Drew Forsyth on drums. So that version basically only stayed in Japan. It wasn't very successful. It broke up, and then Kevin DuBrow got permission to continue on with the name Quiet Riot. So it's essentially two different bands in a way. So there's that kind of history there, but at the same time, I think most people would only really acknowledge the band from Metal Health on. And the reason I picked them is because of the impact that they had on the glam scene. So Metal Health has been certified platinum 6 times. And the big song that came out, well, there were 2 of them, Come On Feel the Noise and Metal Health. It caused a giant surgence in that scene. Record companies were looking everywhere to sign bands because that album was so big. It came out of nowhere, it hit like a tank, and it really caused the genesis of a lot of what the metal scene at the time became. Like, there's a lot of bands who would have never even gotten a chance had Metal Health not come out. And so, even though, like, their albums following it were never quite as big, that one album was so impactful that it really changed the scene. They have been around ever since. Of course, Kevin DuBrow has passed away. I don't know what year it was. I apologize. Let's see, when did he pass away? 2007. And they've continued on with various singers. I don't necessarily, have much interest in them now. I think the only one who's around now is Rudy Sarzo, who replaced Chuck Wright, who replaced Rudy Sarzo at one point. They've kind of gone back and forth, and so, that's really neither here nor there, but their impact of the time was just felt throughout the metal scene, and I don't think the metal scene would have been as big without them.
I don't know. I get what you're saying, and they're considered to be the first heavy metal band to have a #1 album, with Metal Health, and I see that point of it, and I've heard that same point before, but I don't know. I mean, if they release Metal Health, if it doesn't come out and it doesn't become popular, do bands like Poison, Cinderella, Skid Row, do those bands come out?
I think those bands do, but a lot of the other bands don't exist because they would have never gotten the shot.
You're talking about the lesser, like the mid card bands.
The mid, yeah, like say for instance, Dangerous Toys or Crocus or Pix or freaking Winger. I mean, like, a lot of those bands, they don't even get a level of notoriety. And so, like, there's still good music that came from a lot of those bands. So it's just a matter of, like, what is a record company looking for? They want the top of the top. They want whatever people want to buy. And so I think a lot of those bands never get a shot.
I mean, I could see that. I could see that point of it. I don't totally agree with that, only because you had bands like Motley Crue that started in 1981. You have a band like Bon Jovi that started the same year as that album broke, but they obviously clearly made an impact, and then the band that I'm going to talk about also started before, well, actually probably started around the same time as the original Quiet Riot, but the reformed Quiet Riot, these guys were already an established act. Now, what I'm going to talk about is Dokken.
Okay.
Dokken, consists of Don Dokken on vocals and some rhythm guitars, George Lynch on lead guitars and most of the other guitars, Jeff Pilson on bass, and Mick Brown on drums. Now, Don Dokken formed the band Dokken in 1978, but in reality, the classic lineup that's here that's that became famous in the 80s formed in, I think it was 1980 or 81 or something like that. They released 4 classic albums in the 80s, which was Breaking the Chains. That did not get certified. Tooth and Nail, certified platinum. Under Lock and Key, certified platinum. Back for the Attack, certified platinum. So that classic lineup split up in 1989. They reunited in 1994 and split up again in 1997. They reunited a few years ago. I think it was 2016. They did a show in South Dakota as a warm-up for a gig that they did in Japan. And that band, I believe, has not been together since, or maybe they did an album. And then Don said, well, I got my band, my regular Dokken band. I'm just going to use those guys from now on. And George Lynch has toured on and off doing one or two songs or 3 songs a night with Don. So basically George is touring with Dokken, but he's not really in the band, and it's just a weird thing. And I think the last tour was Lynch Mob was opening, and that's why George was there. Very strange setup. But Dokken, for me, Tooth and Nail was pretty big. I mean, Alone Again was a huge hit, and it Just Got Lucky, Into the Fire. I mean, that was a big hit. And then all of a sudden, the next year they come out with Under Lock and Key, and they were big. So Under Lock and Key came out in 84. I mean, excuse me, in 85. Tooth and Nail 84. So yeah, I mean, maybe because like Breaking the Chains came out the same year as Metal Health, so maybe because of Metal Health, Dokken is more popular. That's a good possibility.
I mean, it is possible.
No,
we will never know, but
exactly. It's one of those things, because the American version of Breaking the Chains came out in Europe 2 years earlier in 1981. The American version came out in 1983. It was re-recorded, new recorded versions of the old songs. Or no, I'm sorry, they were remix versions of the old songs, and a couple of songs they changed the lyrics to.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, does Dokken become popular because of Metal Health? That's a good possibility. But again, the whole scene was exploding. Motley Crue was exploding. I mean, they played the US Festival the same day as Quiet Riot, who opened the US Festival. And so in 1983, so that was, and Motley Crue came out with their Shout at the Devil outfits, and they were playing songs from Shout at the Devil. So I don't believe it had been released yet when the US Festival happened, but I could be wrong. So, I mean, I kind of see your point with Quiet Riot, and my counterpoint per se with Dokken, could conceivably have been a byproduct of the fact that Quiet Riot was super popular. Yeah, Motley Crue Shout at the Devil came out in September of 83. So I believe Quiet Riot was already huge at that point.
I mean, for me, it's just it's a matter of timing. A lot of times, like, so when a band hits, with whatever major album it is, and things fall in place afterward, because not necessarily because of inspiration, but they generate that initial buzz. And so it could have been anybody else. And let's say, another band shows up that, puts out a song and it causes the same effect to some degree. That would be one thing, but that history happened how it happened. And Quiet Riot hit before a lot of the other bands, and they had massive appeal for a wide audience, and it just worked out the way it did.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The US Festival happened May 28th, 29th, and 30th of 1983. So in May, so Motley Crue played the US Festival in their Shout at the Devil costumes, and Shout at the Devil was still 6 months out from being released. And they played a couple tracks from the album, so that was pretty cool. Quiet Riot played that. They opened up the festival on Heavy Metal Day, and they were basically promoting Metal Health, which had come out 2 months earlier, and became number one in November of 1983. So it took a while, but I remember that summer, man. That song, "Come On, Feel the Noise," was on. It was on. I believe it became number one song as well. So you've got this song that's just on the radio every 45 minutes, and it's on pop radio, it's on rock radio, it's on every freaking radio station in the country. And what really annoyed me, though, as a purist, was every time you heard it on the pop rock station, not even the pop rock station, on the pop station, the same stations that play all the top Hot 100 songs. It was an edited version that cut the guitar solo. I hated that. It was just terrible.
I thought you were gonna say they edited it to where it was like beep on feel the noise.
no, it was just.
I'm kidding.
They edited the fucking guitar solo, and I'm like, why?
That's painful. As a metal fan, like, why cut the guitar solo?
Well, they didn't cut all of it. They just cut there was a buildup in the song where right after the second verse, it kind of slows down and goes dang, dang, like it builds up to the guitar solo, and they went straight to they bypassed the buildup, and they went into this part of the guitar solo where Carlos Cavasso was kind of like going up the neck, trying to get from the lower key to the higher key, and it just went straight into that, and I'm like, oh God, this is terrible. But
radio edited,
mind you,
radio edits piss me off a lot of times. So,
I mean, and the funny thing is, it's because they were trying to get it down to like 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The song itself was 4 minutes and 51 seconds long, and it's like, really, you have to cut out a whole minute? But I get that's pop radio. When they played on the rock stations, it played the full version. But when they played on the pop Hot 100 stations, they played the edited version. And then when they did, Casey Kasem's Top 40, they played the edited version, which sucked. But anyway, so I mean, I can see. I mean, there's definitely a lot of credence to be had when it comes to Quiet Riot. Now, the reason why I left Quiet Riot off was because
you're a Philistine.
No, really because I hadn't thought about we mentioned that some of the bands I picked was because of influence, and I really didn't think deeply enough about the influence that they had because of that one album. Because after that, I mean, I liked them, but after that, Mama We're All Crazy Now, which was another cover song from Slade, didn't have the same impact. It was like, why are you doing another Slade cover? I mean, like now you're just becoming a repetitious, comical version of yourself.
Yeah, honestly, it's really that first album. Yeah, and the first album just had such a wide reach.
Yes, and the second album, Condition Critical, wasn't horrible. It came out a year later. It wasn't bad. I mean, I like, Sign of the Times was a good song. Mama We're All Crazy Now was a good song. Party All Night was a good song. And Winners Take All was kind of another ballad kind of song that was similar to Thunderbird, but it didn't have the same impact. And then, of course, part of the issue too was Kevin Dubrow started running his mouth, and people were just tired of his shit.
Got himself kicked out.
Yeah, I know. Within 3 years, he gets himself kicked out of the band, which is crazy. Or 4 years, and it's like,
Side note, how'd you feel about that Paul Sortino album?
They have one really good song. Stay With Me Tonight.
He's got a good voice.
I love Paul's voice. I mean, he's got that rough kind of very similar voice to Janis Joplin, and they did that song. They did that Janis Joplin song on their first album. What the hell's the name of the band? I forgot. Paul Shortino, Rough Cut was their first album. They did "Take a Piece of My Heart" or "Piece of My Heart," which was a Janis Joplin song, and he did a great version, great cover, and that's as far as they went. Paul Shortino's on Stars, the hearing aid benefit song.
Yeah. He's on there.
He sings on there, and you can hear his voice so distinct. I love his voice. And then really he never did anything else after that, but he's been,
I mean, he had his solo albums, but yeah, nothing major.
Yeah, nothing major, and he
was like King Cobra.
Was he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he still is. Yeah, he's the lead singer for.
Right, he's a singer. Yeah, this is now. I mean, we're talking 2023.
No, I know. I mean,
he's maintained his life through one way or another singing. But yeah, I loved his voice back in the day. I'm surprised that Rough Cut didn't get as big as they could have. Another one of those situations that probably got eaten up by a record company.
If you click on the link for "We Are Warriors" by King Cobra, it takes you to a Avril Lavigne album on Wiki.
Nice. Paul Shortino. I mean, think about it, like Rough Cut. I mean, he put out 2 albums, Rough Cut and Wants You, and then they kind of disappeared. And then, 10 years later, they reappear with live albums and EPs and bullshit. But Shortino had his career, and he's basically maintained himself. And actually, he's been with King Cobra for a while.
Yeah, since 2011.
Yeah, so that's pretty impressive. But I thought he was a great singer. It's just unfortunate that they never really took off.
True.
Now I said that "Piece of My Heart" was a Janis Joplin cover, but in all reality, that's actually a cover song of an Irma Franklin song.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm not familiar with the song. I'm gonna have to check it out after we get.
It's a pretty cool song. I mean, their version's good. I mean, obviously Janis Joplin kind of made the song famous.
I know the Janis Joplin version. I just don't know the Paul Shortino rough cut version. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, they were a flash in the pan. But you're right. I mean, think about it. The album came out in 1985. Are they a result of Quiet Riot and Quiet Riot's popularity? Because they're from the same area, Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good possibility that they're connected in that way. I mean, right after, what I say, it came out in 85, basically 3 years later, Paul Shortino is now the lead singer of Quiet Riot, and Kevin DuBro's out.
Yeah.
I thought that was weird back then when that happened. I was like, oh shit, they fired the dude. But
yeah, he kind of rubbed people the wrong way many times.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, and then it's funny because at that point, I think they, and this is total speculation. I think that Quiet Riot was thinking, let's get a hold of this now. Let's get a new singer now. Because look, Van Halen did it. We can do it too. And I think
I wonder if there were several bands that kind of looked at that, like, because Van Halen obviously is one of the most successful bands that replaced their singer. And I wonder if a lot of bands had that confidence because of, say, like a Van Halen going, or, like replacing David Lee Roth with Sammy Hagar.
Yeah, I mean
that is an interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyhow, that's something I've thought about before. And so, I see your point on Quiet Riot there. Especially over Dokken.
I mean, I've come to appreciate Dokken over the last few years. I really have, because I was never a fan, because I personally, I'm just not a big fan of Don's voice. It's not that his voice is bad by any means. It just doesn't have, like, there's a couple albums where there's a lot of power behind it, but then most of them, it's like, it's so tame, and I just want him to like go to that next level and just like pump it up, and it just never happens. And so I'm just not a big fan, but what I've come to really enjoy is the whole package, the music, you know, really, the first few albums, like I really like Under Lock and Key. What's the one with Into the Fire?
Oh, Tooth and Nail.
Tooth and Nail, that one's great. And then Breaking the Chains. Those three for me are just great albums.
Oh, I mean the classic albums from the '80s, because you got to add Back for the Attack in there. I mean, he's got some great
I like that one as well. Yeah,
so it's they were classic albums for them, and people loved to talk about, I would love for Dokken to reunite, and it's so funny because we hear the same thing. Everyone wants Skid Row to reunite. Do we really?
Yes,
want Skid Row to reunite? Do we really want Dokken to reunite? And I look at it and say, because the nostalgia factor in your mind is, and I'm not saying yours, but in the person's mind that wants these reunions to happen, it's like, they're not going to sound or look anything like what you remember in the 80s. Real, yeah. So it's like your level of disappointment is going to be so high when that show's over, or even when the first chord hits, that it's going to be like, oh fuck, I should never have come. Because you're totally destroying your image.
I don't think Skid Row would be too bad. The problem obviously is their personalities and their ability to get along. But I don't think Skid Row would like wreck it as much as some of the others where you go,
no, right. I mean,
I don't want to hear that.
I mean, Sebastian's voice is still good.
It's still decent. Yeah. I mean, you can tell he's a bit older, especially in the last couple of years. The new song that he released is not bad. So I mean, he's not as bad as some of the others, but definitely I don't want to necessarily see Dokken reunite.
Oh, after hearing some of those songs that I heard, no way. Do I want to see them? It's just, I mean, I saw them in a club, face to face. I got all 4 of the classic lineup to sign my poster, and I'm happy with that. And I'll leave it at that.
Treasure the memory.
Exactly, I'll treasure that memory. So the other bands that we had that were not in common, you picked Poison and I picked Rat. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about Rat because I have some things to say about Poison that we'll leave them for the end.
Okay.
So my 4th choice was Rat, and the reason why I picked Rat was because I feel they had a big influence on the scene. And I could be wrong, but I believe, they had a big influence on the scene. I mean, they were formed, for lack of a better idea, even though they were technically formed in 1976, Rat changed their name in 1977, or they formed as Mickey Rat. They changed as Rat, but the classic lineup formed in the early 80s. And the classic lineup is Stephen Pearcy on vocals, Warren DeMartini on guitars, Robin Crosby on guitars, Juan Crocier on bass, and Bobby Blotzer on drums. Juan Crocier also played bass on the first Dokken album, Breaking the Chains. So they're all related somehow, one way or the other. I picked Rat. Their first album, comes out in 1984. It's a year after Quiet Riot's debut album. I think, and this the funny thing, they were around at the same time as Motley Crue. They just hadn't gotten signed. 1983, they released their EP, so they had popularity locally, so they still weren't national. So they were contemporaries of Quiet Riot. They were contemporaries of Dokken. They were contemporaries of Motley Crue. They were actually friends with Motley Crue. So they just didn't make it as fast as Motley Crue did. They tried to go down the same route, do an independent record. It grew some popularity, and they were getting there, but it didn't come as fast for them as it did for Crue and as it did for Quiet Riot. But Out of the Cellar, huge album. I mean, it's triple platinum. You know, the 4 albums that they released in the 1980s that are considered the classic albums was Out of the Cellar, triple platinum, Invasion of Your Privacy, double platinum, Dancing Undercover, platinum, and Reach for the Sky, platinum. And they even, I believe, is the one after Reach for the Sky, Detonator, came out in 1990. That went gold. You know, so that was basically the end of their run of albums until 1999, where they got back together. But that's a whole nother story because they've never been the same band since they split after 1991. They broke up, and the classic 5 members of Rat never would be together again. And then in 2002, Robin Crosby passed away from a heroin overdose 1 year after announcing that he was HIV positive. They gotten back together, you know, but not all the 5 classic guys were there until, you know, obviously now they can't do it after 2002, but before that, between 91 and 2002, the 5 guys never got back together. So
that's crazy to think, but yeah, it's definitely true. I watched I think it was a behind the music or something on them when we an episode before, and you know, just kind of hearing their history and what happened with Robin and how he kind of felt, you know, like he was let down by the other guys. You know, it's kind of a sad history, but yeah, I mean, I would agree with you on a lot of accounts, like with you know what their impact was and you know, some of those things, but for me, I don't quite think of it the same way. But continue on.
and I understand that, you know, Out of the Cellar, because when we did the head-to-head that included Out of the Cellar, I mean, we sat back and we analyzed it, and you realize that there's certain things about it. You're like, oh, you know, Stephen Pearcy's not the greatest vocalist in the world. He's kind of, you know, he's got one lane and he stayed in it.
Yeah.
You know, Warren DeMartini, excellent guitar player. Robin Crosby, excellent guitar player. Warren, obviously, you know, was more of the guitar hero than Robin. I believe Warren was more of the lead guitarist, even though they both they shared lead guitar together. But you know, Warren just was more, I guess, popular for what it's worth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, the band, you know, Out of the Cellar was a big album. You know, I remember you know, I can't sit there and say, oh, I was there, you know, when the EP was still independent. That's not true. I can't sit there and say that. I can sit there and say that I heard them. I was part of the boost that Out of the Cellar had, you know, because I was listening to it. I saw it on MTV. I bought the record. I went back and I bought the EP. Then I went back and I found, if I'm not mistaken, I found the original EP first, and then they re-released it again in 85 before Invasion of Your Privacy because of the popularity. And the EP included the song "You Think You're Tough," which was what got them signed to begin with. I think there's that influence because they were friends with Motley Crue, because they were part of that whole scene. They were, to me, they're in it, you know, and maybe, you know, when you think about it, maybe they're a tertiary band similar to how Exodus was part of the Bay Area thrash scene, but they're not part of the big 4, although many people think they should be. You know, they think they should, you know, be a big 5.
I'm gonna go with that Rat is the Exodus of this group. So there's a couple decent songs, okay? I'm not gonna take anything away from them. It's my personal opinion. I think Round and Round is still a classic song. But for the most part, I just don't dig Rat's sound. I don't like what they do. And it's just one of those bands that just, like, when I hear them, I'm just not into it. So, yeah, that's my feeling on Rat.
So to finish off what I have to say about Rat, is really, I put them in there because they were part of that scene and they had a big album, right?
Okay.
With Out of the Cellar. When I think back about Rat, the one, and this is a really weird thing to say, the one thing I didn't like about Rat, they never put out a live album. like you look at their official releases and there's no live albums.
I wonder why.
I mean, you look on their discography on Wikipedia, there's no live album. Like they had some live stuff that popped up here and there on the video, but no live album. And I really find that absolutely interesting and confusing at the same time.
It's a little odd for that time period, yeah.
So Rat to me is like an anomaly when it comes to this, and I now that I think about it, when I'm putting this all together, you've got me all messed up, man.
And I'm gonna mess you up even further with my argument here.
No, your argument with Poison, I have a lot to say about that, and we'll go into that when you talk about Poison. So to finish off Rat, yes, they're strange. I put them in there because they were friends with Motley Crue and they were associated and they became big at the same time that everything blew up, 1983, 84. So
okay.
That's why I put them in. That's why it's my big four. I may have to go back and reevaluate this, and we'll do a whole new episode on another big four Glam. But anyway, I'm just joking. Poison, you picked Poison, and I completely understand why. So go ahead and tell me why.
Okay, so Poison, you probably know I'm not the biggest fan, but at the same time, when I think of Glam, again, like Motley Crue, I think of Poison. Poison came they started in 1983. They were under a different name at the time. They called themselves Paris. The only difference being they had Matt Smith on drums. Matt Smith on guitars instead of CC DeVille at the time. So the original lineup that we're going to talk about is Bret Michaels on lead vocals and rhythm guitar, CC DeVille on lead guitar, Bobby Dahl on bass, and Ricky Rocket on drums. They released their first album in 1986, Look What the Cat Dragged In. To me, you look at the cover of that album, them 100% glammed up, looking like ladies. That's a glam image. It's just, they nailed it right there. Not to mention that is a huge album. Cry Tough, Talk Dirty to Me, I Want Action, I Won't Forget You. Those are the main singles, but the whole album itself, if you want a glam album, like that's a glam album. Their second album is Open Up and Say Ah, and that one was even bigger. And so you're talking about Out of the Cellar. Well, Out of the Cellar was a 3-time platinum album, and that was their second album, right? So
Out of the Cellar was a debut.
Oh, okay. So they just had the Rat EP before that, right?
Right. Yeah.
So okay. So Invasion of Your Privacy, though, was not a bigger album. They went down, right?
Yes.
Poison got bigger after their first album. They released Open Up and Say Ah, and it had Nothing But a Good Time, Fallen Angel, Every Rose Has Its Thorn, which is just a crossover massive hit, and Bret Michaels Won't Let It Go. Your Mama Don't Dance. And so, like, this was an even bigger album. It was 5 times platinum in the US. And across the board in most countries, like, it was even bigger. Okay. So then they released Flesh and Blood in 1990. Now that one again was a 3-time platinum album. It had Unskinny Bop, which is a huge hit, Something to Believe In, Ride the Wind, Life Goes On, Flesh and Blood Sacrifice, all big hits. And that's into 1990, where it was kind of defying a little bit of what was going on in the music scene, where things were just starting to change. They had still a presence in the MTV scene. There's the famous performance where CC DeVille's whacked out of his mind and they play the wrong song, and so there's still that aspect of it. And sure, you get into 1993, CC DeVille's been fired. They hire Richie Kotzen. That's a whole mess of drama along with it. They put out Native Tongue, which is just not a good album, and there's some drama behind it. So stuff with him and Ricky Rocket, and if you're curious, there's a lot of information out there. But for me, like you really think about the glam scene, like those 3 albums were absolutely massive when things were kind of starting to die down a little bit for glam, and they still like waved the banner, they still came in and did their thing, and were still a very popular band. So yeah, sure, they didn't release albums as early as some of the other bands, but they were around during the early scene. And they have some of the biggest albums that were ever released in that genre.
So when I first put together my list, I had 2 different bands besides Rat and Dokken on my list. Poison was one of them, and I didn't pick Poison because I said, well, they came along too far into the scene to be kind of what I would say influential, right? But are they a byproduct of the earlier years, the bands like Motley Crue, Rat, Dokken, and Bon Jovi? Are they a byproduct of that, and they just perfected it? Who knows? I don't know. But I wanted to put them in, I fucking hemmed and hawed back and forth. I'm like, do I or don't I? I really, really respect Poison in the regards of they come out with "Look What the Cat Dragged In." I can't tell what they are on the front cover. I mean, I looked at that front cover. I bought the album, and I'm looking at that thing, and I'm like, holy cow! And back then, I didn't know about airbrushing. They didn't have that term photoshopped. But
Yeah.
but their makeup was airbrushed on. Because it was a professionally done photo shoot. So it was professionally done.
It was what did they call it? Glamour shots?
Yeah, like glamour shots. And
like all the girls that I knew that were in, middle school, high school, like they all got a glamour shot done. I just remember seeing those and going like, "Oh, those are nice."
So, they are they're I look at that record, I'm like, holy cow! I mean, who are these 4 guys? Are they guys? It's like, it was really weird. I mean, this is 1986. I remember when that album came out. I remember where I bought it. It's the same place that I bought Metallica's Whiplash EP. Same exact store. It was in I'm trying to think. It was in Yonkers. Forgot what they call that part of Yonkers. It's not downtown, but anyway, it was a record store that was there. I went there as much as I could. I mean, I could walk there. It was probably a half-hour walk, but I could walk there. I bought that record. I'm like, wow, this is really good. I went home, listened to it. Loved pretty much everything I heard on it. I mean, I listened to it a lot. Cry Tough, I Want Action. I Won't Forget You obviously was huge. Talk Dirty to Me was huge, but my favorite song on the album is actually Look What the Cat Dragged In, because it's just a freaking killer riff. So I didn't put them on there because I said, did they come too late to the game, but yet we're still big, right? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Another band I had on there was Cinderella. Came out the same year. The 2 of them, Poison and Cinderella, both debuted the same year. Both had huge debut albums.
Yeah.
So that was originally going to be my 4. With Poison, Cinderella, Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, but I changed it and went more with the influential portion of it. Maybe I made a mistake.
Maybe. I think so.
Do you now? I mean, look, Cinderella, their first album, triple platinum, just like Poison. Second album, triple platinum.
True.
Not like Poison, but shit, that's still huge.
No, it's I mean,
and then the third album, platinum.
The only reason I didn't go with Cinderella because they're so much more bluesy in sound,
right?
And so, yeah, and so they had that kind of glam image, but they didn't have really a glam sound per se to me. Like the first album, yeah, but
yeah, exactly. The first album, yes,
yeah.
Right. where Long Cold Winter was a lot more blues album. It's much like Long Cold Winter. The song itself was a blues song. Uh, the first song on the album, Bad Seamstress Blues, Falling Apart at the Seams. Yes, it was supposed to be. They were pushing towards the blues, and that's for the most part. This is the basis of all glam metal anyway. But they were very blues. Although Gypsy Road and Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone, those songs were huge, just like, Nobody's Fool and Shake Me, So, but yeah, I get it. I mean, I took them off and put on two other bands that I thought they weren't necessarily better, but I looked at it more as the scene and the influence.
Yeah, I'm looking at this very objectively. Like, obviously, I'm not the biggest Poison fan, but I feel strongly that Poison is one of the better glam bands. Like, if you're looking at it from the genre perspective, right? Like,
right.
not necessarily about what you like, but looking at it through the lens of what applies to the genre.
See, and that's the funny thing, because I like Poison more than I like Rat.
Mm-hmm.
I like Cinderella way more than I like Dokken.
Yeah.
But I so I should have gone with what I like.
That's funny.
But at the same time, I like them all. I love them all. I'm a big 80s glam guy. I'm an 80s thrash guy. And, so I liked all that stuff in the 80s, because guess what?
Yeah.
In the 80s, it was all heavy metal. When you talked about Quiet Riot influencing and bringing in a lot of other bands, I look at bands like Lizzie Borden. They exist because of Quiet Riot being able to make it and everybody else wanting something. That's exactly true. The one band that we didn't mention, there's a couple bands we didn't mention tonight. Wasp, they were part of that same scene. I think musically they began to lean towards a glam sound, but they didn't start that way.
Yeah.
Another band that we didn't mention that essentially absolutely are a glam band. I'm leaving a certain word out. They are a glam band, is Twisted Sister.
Yeah.
Because they're much harder than a typical glam metal band. Although I wouldn't put the style of music that they play as glam metal. I Want to Rock, We're Not Going to Take It. To me, those are not glam metal songs, but they're the band itself is glam.
No, and they were a little bit more cartoony than some of the other bands. Like,
correct.
Where they were more silly in their appearance versus, a little bit more effeminate, trying to appear, with the makeup and everything. The other bands, they were trying to be a little bit more ambiguous, whereas Quiet Riot was more like looking like grandmas and stuff, like
right.
Not Quiet Riot. Why did I say that? Like Twisted Sister. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's a few other bands that I think like had some major impact. White Snake is one of those where like they took on kind of more of a glam appearance, but necessarily weren't a glam band per se. They're during the US initial run. They kind of had that glam look, but not necessarily being a glam band. More bluesy again. Night Ranger, like you said, Cinderella. Skid Row's at the end of the tail end of that, but I've never really thought of Skid Row as a glam band. Yeah, hair band maybe, but not glam.
Right, exactly. But they're lumped in there because of Bon Jovi.
Yeah, way heavier in sound. Slaughter.
Speaking of Bon Jovi, by the way, Bon Jovi brings out Cinderella, and Bon Jovi brings out Skid Row. Think about that. There's a circle of influence there that's huge.
Yeah.
Another band we didn't mention that actually started before Poison and before Cinderella, or not started, but they released their first album, was White Lion, who had a big album in '87 with Pride, but their first album, Fight to Survive, is an independent classic if you want to look at it that way. It was pretty big. And it's funny here. Wikipedia says it was released on Atlantic Records. It was not released on Atlantic Records. That didn't happen.
and on the other end of it, Vixen could even be considered a glam band.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So there's so many glam bands out there, but what started it all? It was, if you look at it, I mean, Twisted Sister was really early on in that, but they were New York Dolls glam. They were Kiss glam, because Kiss basically was a glam band, but they didn't have that glam metal sound until the 80s.
Yeah.
Then they were again following the trends as opposed to setting the trends. So,
yeah, I mean, glam even really started before that, right? Like, because there's a band like T-Rex.
Right, T-Rex, the New York Dolls, I
mean, Queen and David Bowie even had a lot of that glam kind of thing going. Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, Elton John even, right?
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, shit, you think about it, in the middle 80s, Pantera was a glam band.
It's true, yeah.
So anyhow, there was a lot of glam out there. So that was your big four, and that's my big four.
So I wanted to ask you, because I mentioned this earlier today. So out of your four, who is, say, the Metallica, the Megadeth, the Anthrax, and the Slayer of your bands?
So out of my four, the ones that I picked that I announced, Bon Jovi's Metallica.
Same. I said the same thing. And the reason why is Bon Jovi started off as a glam band, but then evolved, changed, continued to have that level of success that never really changed, and is even bigger now than they ever were.
Right.
Same thing as Metallica.
Right. Now, the other ones, so here's the funny thing about the other ones. Other than Dokken, okay, and you, Motley Crue can sit there and say, well, we came out with new music in 2018. You know what? That shit sucked. I'm sorry. They have not put out good music since 1991 when they released what was that single that was on their greatest hits album, Primal Scream. That was the last really good song, and I would even give Hooligan's Holiday, when after they fired Vince Neil, as a decent song, and that was a single. After that, they haven't released a damn good song since then, and I don't care what you have to say about it, Matt. So,
ouch.
So, let's see, Anthrax. Who would be the same as Anthrax? Probably Dokken.
Okay.
And then Slayer. Motley Crue's like Slayer,
Motley Crue is my Slayer as well.
And then Megadeth would be Rat.
All right, so Megadeth for me was Quiet Riot because Dave and
Dave and Kevin big mouths.
Yeah, right. And so for me, Anthrax was Poison because they're like, they don't really have any enemies or anything like that. They've gone through some changes and this and that, but like, yeah, they're just kind of like the consistent ones.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, so I think mine, especially Quiet Riot, works really well.
Yours line up a lot better than mine. All right, well, that brings us now to our big four for this evening, even though we've been talking about the big four. Our big four glam metal vocalists. And so this is an interesting take as well. I wonder what it's going to be like. So since you went first on this, I'm going to go ahead and go first on mine.
Okay.
All right. So number 4 for me is Don Dokken. You mentioned something about his voice and not being powerful, and there's some times where he kind of brings it. He's just very soft. He's a soft singer, soft spoken. Sometimes he's another one that rubs people the wrong way with, because he's outspoken. But I think that's just because he's a curmudgeon and a grumpy old man. And he's always been a grumpy old man because he's always been older than everybody else.
Yeah.
And, although George Lynch is also older too. But compared to Jeff Pilson and Mick Brown, they're
one can be the oldest.
Exactly. The oldest. So Don, I like his voice. I think for the music that they put together and the way that they wrote it, it mixed well. Sometimes he could have come out with a little bit more balls to him, but it is what it is. Number 3, John Bon Jovi. I think his I mean, obviously it was all the package. John Bon Jovi, the singer, the image, the looks. I mean, shit, people cried because he cut his hair in 1990. It's crazy to think about that. But I love his voice. I always try to emulate his voice as a singer. Wanted Dead or Alive is an amazingly good song. I would love to be able to sing that song. I actually karaoke'd it. I listened back to it. I'm like, oof, hit a couple notes there I shouldn't have hit.
That's pretty good.
But I love his solo album that he did for Blaze of Glory, the Young Guns 2 soundtrack. That was great. So he's my number 3 vocalist. Number 2 for me, and a lot of people are going to sit there and argue, oh, well, this guy's vocals are not that great. Tom Kiefer. Okay. Is there something about him, just like Bon Jovi, the image, the look, the vocals, the styling. I mean, he's a Steven Tyler ripoff right in front of your face. Just the way he looks, not the way he sings, the way he looks in the image and the way he has scarves and shit on his microphone. But vocally, very different. He can sing clean, but then when he starts to push that vocal, it just turns raspy and it turns higher pitch. Very similar to Janis Joplin, very similar to Paul Shortino, although I think Shortino had a lower register to his voice, where Tom was a little higher pitched. And number 1 for me is Mr. Poison, Bret Michaels. He is, to me, he can scat, he can sing, he can like what's David Lee Roth do? He's an entertainer.
Mm-hmm.
He's a vocalist, but Bret has better vocals than David Lee Roth. Bret can actually sing, but he's a really good talent. And so Bret Michaels is my number 1 big 4 vocalist of glam.
Okay. Mine's a bit different. Yeah. My number 4 is Dee Snider. I think Dee has a really unique voice, a really strong voice, and a lot of times, because of the way he sings, you don't realize how good of a singer he can be. And so, like, even though, again, I'm not the biggest Twisted Sister fan, but I have a lot of respect for Dee's abilities. My number 3, I believe, was your number 3 as well, Tom Kiefer. I think Tom has
my number 2.
He's your number 2. Okay. Tom has a great voice, and he overcame a lot, with his damaged vocal cords, and has come back and still sounds great today. He has a really unique style again, and I think like his vocals really set Cinderella apart. My number 2 is Blackie Lawless. I love Wasp. I love the sound that Blackie has. It's very, again, to use the same word again, unique. Blackie has this kind of vibrato that nobody else has, and I just have always really enjoyed his vocals. Not necessarily the best singer ever, but for me, it's. I mean, we're talking about favorites, right? So, I prefer his voice over many others. And my number 1 is Mr. John Bovey himself, Mr. John Bon Jovi. He if you get the joke, you get the joke. That was It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia reference. Anyway, so John Bon Jovi, I mean, just up until recently, obviously he's had some vocal problems where he doesn't have the power that he used to. He's also quite a bit older, so it's totally understandable. But he's still doing his thing. He's still enjoying himself. But his voice always was one of those that, like I said, had massive crossover appeal, very powerful, and just a range like very few others that you can even imagine. And so, like, I don't go out of my way to listen to Bon Jovi a lot, but when it comes on, I usually don't skip it because, good songs and a lot of talent and skill in that band. So, yeah, Bon Jovi number one. Never thought I would say that.
With a bullet. I know, nothing wrong with your list. Although, I mean, do you consider Blackie part of, or Wasp part of the glam scene?
Yeah, I do. I mean, they're tertiary. I mean, they're on the edge, on the cusp of it, right? But they're still part of the glam scene.
Yeah, I mean, Inside the Electric Circus was definitely glam.
Yeah,
Last Command, there was definitely the crossover was happening because they had the production. It was very polished.
yeah. I mean, I don't think they're, like I said, they're not in my big four or anything. But like, I still see glam when I think about them to some extent. Yeah.
All right. Well, sounds good. Well, that's our big four glam metal vocalists, and that's the end of this episode of Debating Metal. I'd like to remind everyone, if you like what you heard today, click like or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or whichever one that you subscribe to. And then you can get our latest episode as soon as it's posted. And while you're at it, leave a review or rating so we know how we're doing.
And don't forget to leave us a comment on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. YouTube viewers, click subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when we post a new episode. So remember to tune in to the next episode when we spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.